After 4 months of waiting, Azure, the newest kill in Forsaken, has come out. And just like every killer release, everyone thinks he's overpowered and broken, which in my opinion, he is not. Azure is in a weird state where he's considered to be bad, decent, and overpowered. This has made opinions of Azure's strength vary significantly and whether he's a good design or not. In this video, I want to go over how Azure functions as a killer and what makes him so unbalanced and inconsistent, and how to fix his core issues. For anyone that doesn't know, Azure is not a trapper, but rather an area denial opportunist killer that uses his abilities to sack his resource, Oblation. His abilities are Seeker Bulb, a stationary turret that shoots survivors that trigger it, Stigmatize, and a mobile flower which attempts to grab survivors when coming into its range. Strangle, an omnidirectional range attack that can grab survivors and throw them to his plants, triggering very high damage combos. Inflorescence, which after reaching 15 Oblation, Azure can summon a Golem which has a completely different set of abilities. In his Golem form, he has Blooming, a ground pound that deals more damage depending on how close the survivor is to the center, Unearthing, which is a shockwave that ragdolls and makes survivors travel along with the attack, and finally Burrowing, which allows Azure to travel between his two forms, acting as a teleport. Azure is a very complicated killer to play, and for good reason. But why is Azure actually unbalanced and inconsistent? Well, firstly, the most obvious factor is he has no on-command aura reveal, which makes stealthing by far the biggest counter to his kit. This makes Azure waste so much time during a match just looking for survivors, and on a setup snowball killer that needs time, this does not work well for him. Secondly, any survivor with undetectable cannot trigger his plants at all, which makes a big chunk of Azure's kit completely invalidated. Characters like 2Time, 07, and Noob can all abuse this counter, although Noob and 2Time actually have a downside to using their stealth abilities, that being wind up and increased movement speed, which Azure can take advantage of. 07 can just use his clone and move normally, making this matchup generally atrocious for Azure. Also, Azure is by far the most map-dependent killer in the game. Because of how his abilities work, he's much better on small maps like Natural Disaster Survival and Roblox HQ, and is worse on bigger maps like York's and Brandon's. In Strangle, his grab, which is considered to be pretty good as it makes his base form combos actually happen, is an overall decent ability. It can be held to predict survivor movement, making them waste stamina and allow for more predictable usage. But since Azure is slowed while aiming and has a brief wind-up period, survivors can just get out of LOS and run, gaining distance and avoiding Strangle altogether. In terms of consistency, I think his plants are just fine. They serve their purpose as being great area denial and combo tools and have meaningful and interesting counterplay, with being able to disable them and drinking Stigmatize and Seeker Bulb projectiles. Although Seeker Bulbs are still a little problematic. Golem is by far Azure's strongest ability, making Azure have double the map pressure since he's able to switch between his two forms. Not to mention, his Golem actually has 90 damage combos, which is obviously amazing, and this can come across as unfair for survivors. The main downside of Golem, though, is the fact that it has a timer, making Azure have to use this ability extremely sparingly, or he'll have to get the ability again from getting Oblation, which most of the time during a match, Azure will be only to summon one Golem a game. This is an issue because Azure is very centered around this ability. The fact that he can't always have it once he's met its conditional makes his strength vary in a match in a very unhealthy manner. This on paper would seem fine, since characters like Sixer are also snowballers, but Sixer can actually get Blood Hunt multiple times a game, and Azure is much more reliant on Golem than Sixer is with Blood Hunt. To put it in crude terms, as long as Azure has Golem up, he is a good killer, and when he doesn't, he is not nearly as viable and will struggle on bigger maps. Now that I've talked about what's wrong with Azure, I want to suggest what I'd change for the character. The two changes that must happen for Azure to actually be consistently good is to make Undetectable not work against his plants, and to make entering Golem a map-wide aura reveal. This would make his survivor matchup significantly better, and not allow stealth to be used to make his mid/late game unbearable. And Strangle also needs some changes. Azure needs to be able to sprint during it to be able to consistently hit the move, especially on maps with a lot of cover. This would be balanced because Azure already drains stamina during the move, and sprinting would make him drain even more, making him having a drawback for this buff. Although, you should definitely be slightly slowed, just to make it fair for survivors and still allow meaningful counterplay while playing around the Strangle. Now, a nerf that I think needs to happen to Azure is his combos. Azure by far has the most consistent high damage combos in the game, which is his biggest strength and carries the character. His Seeker Bulbs need to have diminishing damage per bulb when hitting a survivor, as Seekers can add so much damage to his combos and are the reason they are so oppressive. For each different Seeker Bulb projectile from a different Seeker Bulb that hits a survivor within a certain amount of time, the damage of each bulb would be halved from 4 to 2 to 1, making his combos still good and usable in his base form, but a bit less lethal for survivors. Now finally, The last thing that needs to be changed about this killer is his golem. Once summoned, the golem should not disappear for the rest of the match, but it should still have its current duration, and Azure can add to the golem's timer by getting Oblation. But once the golem runs out of its timer, it should still become unusable until Azure gets more Oblation. This should make his golem more consistently available, and allow Azure to make more consistent, interesting plays by being able to pressure survivors with the golem. If this change were to happen, I think his golem combos also need to be addressed. The overall damage of his attacks in golem form need to be decreased, and more focus should be put on his golem's utility value that it gives it zoning and map pressure, rather than being able to drop the survivor within 10 seconds. This would make Azure much more consistently good, as golem wouldn't be the deciding factor whether he's viable or not. Alright, that's about all I wanted to say about Azure's current state. I hope I covered all of his issues, and I really hope he does get some attention soon, because this killer is too unique and too interesting to be unbalanced.